August 19th, 1944. A ditch somewhere east of Falaise, France. The air tastes of burned diesel and cordite. It's a thick, metallic soup that coats the tongue and stings the eyes. For Hannelore Schmidt, a 21-year-old Nachrichtenhelferin, a signals auxiliary of the German Wehrmacht, the world has shrunk to the crackle and hiss of her field radio. The headset presses hard against her ears, a futile attempt to block out the symphony of chaos erupting around her. The familiar, comforting scream of a Junkers Ju-87 Stuka is gone, replaced by the high, predatory whine of American P-47 Thunderbolts. They come in low, their .5 caliber machine guns tearing the earth into brown fountains. Hannelore flinches with each pass, her knuckles white on the radio's crank. She is trying to raise the command post at Trun, a task she knows is impossible. The line is dead. Everything is dead. Her uniform, a smart field gray tailored for a woman, is stained with mud and something dark she refuses to identify. Just hours ago, it had been a symbol of her duty, her pride. Now, it feels like a shroud. A few meters away, Gisela Weber, a nurse with the Deutsches Rotes Kreuz, the German Red Cross, works silently over a wounded Panzer Grenadier. He is barely a boy, his face a pale mask of shock, his leg a ruin of cloth and bone. Gisela's movements are economical, devoid of panic. She has seen too much to afford panic. Her weariness is a physical presence, a heavy cloak she wears over her uniform. She looks at Hannelore, her eyes conveying a message that needs no radio to transmit. It's over. The rumbling begins not as a sound, but as a vibration in the soil, traveling up through Hannelore's boots and into her teeth. It's a low, grinding growl that is not German. It is the sound of Sherman tanks, dozens of them, churning through the fields and orchards, their hulls dark against the smoke-choked horizon. The sharp, distinct ping of an M1 Garand ejecting a clip echoes from the woods nearby, a sound becoming more frequent, more terrifyingly close than the familiar retort of their own Karabiner 98Ks. Hannelore was taught that the Americans were decadent, soft, a rabble of gangsters and shopkeepers, but the sound of their advance is methodical, relentless, industrial. It is the sound of a world-ending machine. Shouts erupt in a language she barely understands. Hands up! Hand ho! God damn it! A shadow falls over her ditch. She looks up from her silent radio into the face of a young American GI. He can't be much older than she is. His face is smeared with grime and sweat. His helmet sits low over his eyes, but his expression isn't one of monstrous fury. It's one of exhaustion and a flicker of something else. Surprise? Pity? He sees her, a woman in a German army uniform, and for a moment the machinery of war grinds to a halt in his eyes. Then his training takes over. He gestures with his rifle. Out. Come. Schnell. Hannelore rises slowly, her hands held high. The gesture feels alien, a complete capitulation of everything she has been trained to be. She sees Gisela doing the same, her own hands raised, the bloody bandages still clutched in one fist. They are herded with the few remaining soldiers, a pathetic collection of the wounded, the dazed, and the defeated. The pocket has closed. The escape route is a myth. They are prisoners of war. The words feel unreal. She had been raised in the Bund Deutscher Mädel, the League of German Girls, taught that her role was to support the Reich, to be strong, to embody German virtue. Surrender was not in the vocabulary. They are marched down a road cratered by artillery, past the burning husks of their own vehicles, Panzers and SDKF's 251 half-tracks twisted into grotesque sculptures of blackened steel. The smell is overwhelming. The Americans are efficient. They search them for weapons, their movements impersonal and rough. They take her sidearm, a small Walther PPK she was issued for personal defense. It feels like a violation, a stripping away of her identity. She is no longer auxiliary signals operator Schmidt. She is a number, a piece of human chattel. They are loaded onto the back of a canvas-covered GMC truck. As the truck lurches forward, Hannelore looks back one last time at the smoke, the fields of Normandy, the funeral pyre of the 7th Army. I catch Gisela's eye. The older woman's face is grim, a slate wiped clean of emotion. The propaganda films had shown them what to expect from the Americans, the British, the Soviets. Cruelty, starvation, violation. They were the enemy, and now they were in the enemy's hands, rattling down a ruined road, heading west, into an abyss of terrifying uncertainty.
The journey across the Atlantic is a purgatory of gray. Gray sea, gray sky, gray steel of the transport ship. For weeks, Hannelore Schmidt and the other captured women are confined below decks, the air thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, disinfectant, and the perpetual dampness of the ocean. Seasickness is a relentless plague, reducing proud members of the Wehrmacht and its auxiliary services to miserable, retching heaps. They are a cargo of defeated women, adrift between a world that has been annihilated and one they cannot possibly imagine. The American Guards are a constant, dispassionate presence. They are not the monsters from the newsreels. They are farm boys from places called Iowa and Ohio, chewing gum and looking bored. Their casual demeanor is, in its own way, more unsettling than outright brutality. It suggests that this, the capture and transport of thousands of enemies, is simply a routine task, a logistical problem to be managed. They dock somewhere on the East Coast. Through a porthole, Hannelore catches a glimpse of a skyline so vast and impossibly tall, it seems like a theatrical backdrop, not a real city. There are no bombed-out buildings, no columns of smoke. There is only a dizzying display of power and permanence. From the ship, they are herded onto a train. The windows are blacked out at first, but as they travel deeper into the continent, the covers are removed, and what they see is more disorienting than any battlefield. It is the emptiness. Mile after mile, hour after hour, a vast open land stretching to a horizon that seems a universe away. In Germany, every patch of land was a farm, a village, a forest steeped in 1,000 years of history. This American landscape is an immense, unwritten page. The train finally shudders to a halt in a blast of heat that feels like a physical blow. The sign on the small station reads, Mexia, Texas. The words mean nothing to them. They are marched from the station to their new home, prisoner of war camp Mexia. Barbed wire fences stretch in perfect geometric lines. Wooden watchtowers punctuate the perimeter. Inside, simple one-story wooden barracks are laid out in a grid under a sun of unforgiving intensity. This, Hannelore thinks, is what she expected. A prison, a cage. But as the days turn into weeks and the weeks into months, the reality of the camp begins to diverge from the nightmare she had envisioned. The food is not poison. It is plain, but plentiful. White bread, potatoes, meat she doesn't recognize. There is coffee, thin and American style, but it is hot. The barracks are clean. The cots have mattresses. They are issued simple denim work clothes. The American camp commander, a Captain Miller, addresses them through a translator. He lays out the rules, the regulations of the Geneva Convention. There will be roll calls, work details, inspections. He is formal, detached, a bureaucrat of war. Gisela Weber, the nurse, is put to work in the camp infirmary, her skills immediately valued. Her pragmatism finds a purpose. But for Hannelore, a signal specialist, there is nothing. Nothing but the heat, the dust, the endless Texas sky, and the gnawing monotony of confinement. A rigid social structure quickly forms among the prisoners. The most fanatical women, former camp guards from the East or zealous party officials, appoint themselves as the camp's unofficial leadership. They enforce a strict code of conduct, holding secret meetings to bolster morale and reaffirm their faith in the Führer and the final victory. They sing patriotic songs, their voices thin and defiant against the hum of the cicadas. Hannelore, desperate for the certainty and purpose she has lost, clings to this group. She needs to believe the war is not lost. She needs to believe their suffering has meaning. They whisper stories about Allied defeats, about secret weapons that will turn the tide. They repeat the propaganda they were raised on as if it were a holy scripture. America is a decadent, crumbling society, rotten from within. Its strength is an illusion. Soon it will collapse. But the evidence of her own eyes provides a constant, nagging contradiction. The guards are not collapsing. They complain about the food, the heat, their girlfriends back home. They read comic books and listen to jazz on the radio. The supply trucks that arrive at the camp are always full. The mail from home, when it comes, is heavily censored, but speaks of rationing, of bombing raids, of a world contracting in fear. Here, outside the wire, life seems to go on with an effortless, maddening normalcy. The cognitive dissonance is a low-grade fever that never breaks. You sit inside a barbed wire cage in the middle of Texas, thousands of miles from home, and you try to reconcile the world you were told exists with the one you are now forced to inhabit. And every day, the chasm between the two grows wider, more impossible to ignore. The initial shock of capture has faded, replaced by a dull, aching dread. The war is a distant rumor, and their lives have become a waiting game, a long, slow surrender, not to the enemy, but to the crushing weight of reality itself.
Spring of 1945 bled into the searing heat of a Texas summer.
The war in Europe was over. The news had arrived like a death certificate, clinical and undeniable, delivered by Captain Miller and his translator. For the fanatical core of the prisoners at Camp Mexia, it was a lie, an enemy trick. For others, like Gisela, it was a confirmation of the inevitable. For Hannelore, it was a void. The entire purpose of her existence, victory for the Reich, had evaporated, leaving behind a hollow echo. The camp's self-appointed Nazi leadership grew more strident, more desperate. They punished any woman who seemed to be fraternizing too closely with the guards or showing signs of wavering faith. They held kangaroo courts, dispensing judgments and ostracizing those deemed weak. The barbed wire, Hannelore realized, now served two purposes: to keep them in and to keep the truth out. Life settled into a new, more bitter monotony. The days were measured by the slow crawl of shadows across the bleached dust of the compound. Roll call at dawn, the bland breakfast, the make-work details, laundry, kitchen duty, weeding the barren patches of earth that refused to grow anything but thorns. Then the long, empty afternoons spent trying to escape the oppressive sun in the stifling air of the barracks, listening to the true believers whisper fantasies of a resurgent Germany while staring at the cracks in the wooden walls. The future was not a concept, it was a blank space, a terrifying, formless expanse beyond the fence. They were ghosts haunting their own lives, disconnected from the world, their pasts irrelevant, their futures canceled. One blistering afternoon in July, the routine was shattered. A jeep kicked up a plume of dust as it rolled to a stop in the center of the compound. Captain Miller emerged, clipboard in hand. An order was barked for all prisoners to assemble. The women shuffled out of the barracks, blinking in the harsh sunlight, forming ragged lines. Whispers rippled through the ranks. Was it a new interrogation? A transfer to a worse camp? Had they discovered the secret radio someone had tried to build from scavenged parts? The senior Nazi woman, a stern former overseer named Ilsa, stood at the front, her posture rigid, a silent challenge to the Americans' authority. Captain Miller waited for the German non-commissioned officer to call them to attention. He cleared his throat. "At ease," he said, his voice calm, almost casual. The translator echoed the command in German. "This evening," Miller began, "there will be an outing for the prisoners of B Barracks." A stunned silence fell over the compound. An outing? The word was absurd, a category of experience that had ceased to exist. "You will be escorted into the town of Mexia." The murmuring grew louder now, a mixture of disbelief and deep suspicion. Ilsa's eyes narrowed. This was a trick. It had to be. A psychological ploy designed to break them. "What is the purpose of this outing?" Ilsa asked, her voice sharp and formal. Miller looked at her, a faint, unreadable smile on his face. "Entertainment," he replied simply. "You're going to the local picture show. The bus, the trucks will be ready at 1800 hours. Be ready." He turned, got back in his jeep, and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust and utter confusion in his wake. The compound erupted. Ilsa and her loyalists immediately began to work the barracks. "It is a trap," she hissed, her voice low and urgent. "They want to corrupt you, to fill your minds with their degenerate Jewish propaganda. They will parade us through the streets to humiliate us. A true German woman will refuse. It is a test of your loyalty to the fatherland, even in defeat." Hannelore felt a surge of agreement. Of course it was a trick. The enemy does not offer entertainment. The enemy seeks to destroy your spirit. To go would be a betrayal. But a current of something else was running through the barracks, a powerful undercurrent of desperate curiosity. Months of staring at the same wire fence, the same dusty ground, the same tired faces. The thought of seeing something, anything else, was a potent temptation. Even Gisela, usually so detached, seemed intrigued. "What harm can it do?" she murmured to a friend. "To see a film? We are already prisoners. What more can they take from us?" The argument raged throughout the afternoon, but the decision was not theirs to make. At 1745 hours, American guards, armed with M1 rifles, appeared at the door of B Barracks. A sergeant read from a list. Hannelore's name was called. Gisela's. One by one, they were ordered out. There was no option to refuse. Ilsa shot a venomous glare at those who were leaving, a look that promised retribution. Hannelore's stomach was a knot of anxiety and a strange, shameful flicker of excitement. She was being forced to collaborate in the enemy's scheme. She climbed into the back of a U.S. Army deuce-and-a-half truck, the same kind of vehicle that had taken her from the battlefield in France. The canvas flaps were rolled up, exposing them to the evening air. She sat on a hard wooden bench, shoulder to shoulder with other women, their faces a mixture of fear, defiance, and nervous anticipation. The engine roared to life.
The truck rumbled forward, past the familiar barracks, past the guard towers, and toward the main gate. With a groan of metal, the gate swung open. The truck passed through. For the first time in nearly a year, Hannelore Schmidt was outside the wire, a prisoner on her way to the movies, feeling more captive to the unknown than she ever had inside the camp.
The journey into the town of Mexia was a surreal passage into another dimension. The truck bounced along a paved road, a luxury after the dirt tracks of the camp. Hannelore gripped the wooden bench, her senses overwhelmed. She saw houses with green lawns and sprinklers casting rainbows in the golden evening light. She saw children riding bicycles, their laughter carrying on the warm air. She saw women, American women, driving automobiles with a casual confidence that was utterly foreign. There were no columns of refugees, no rubble, no uniformed men on every corner. The war, which had consumed her entire world, was not a visible scar on this place. It was an abstraction, a distant headline in a newspaper. Goebbels' newsreels had shown them an America crippled by strikes, racial strife, and decadent decay, a hollow giant on the verge of collapse. This serene, prosperous town was a powerful, silent rebuttal. The truck pulled to a stop in front of a building that glowed with a strange magic. A vertical sign spelled out majestic in blinking light bulbs. Beneath it, a marquee announced the evening's feature, Meet Me in St. Louis. Colorful posters behind glass depicted smiling, impossibly beautiful people in vibrant costumes. This was the picture show. The women were ordered out of the truck, and they formed a tight, silent group on the sidewalk. Local townspeople stopped to stare, their faces filled not with the overt hatred Hannelore had expected, but with a plain, simple curiosity. They looked at the German women in their drab POW work clothes as if they were exotic animals from a visiting circus. The lack of animosity was more disorienting than any curse. They were led inside by the guards. The interior of the theater was a palace of red velvet and polished wood. The air was cool and smelled of something sweet and buttery she had never encountered before, popcorn. American civilians were already in their seats, and a low murmur filled the hall. The German women were directed to a cordoned-off section of seats in the center. As Hannelore sat down, the plushness of the seat was a shock. It was an indulgence, a comfort so alien it felt almost obscene. She sat rigidly, her back straight, feeling the eyes of the Americans on her. She was on display, a specimen of the defeated enemy. She resolved to show nothing, to be a stoic German, immune to this cheap psychological trick. The house lights dimmed. A hush fell over the audience. Massive curtains swept aside, and the screen flickered to life. The experience was an assault on the senses. It was in Technicolor. The colors were so vivid, so saturated, they seemed more real than reality itself. The films she had seen in Germany were stark, black and white affairs, heroic dramas of sacrifice, or grim documentaries of the war effort. This was something else entirely. It was a musical, a story of an idyllic American family at the turn of the century. There was no struggle, no grand destiny, only family dinners, romantic misunderstandings, and cheerful songs. The actress, Judy Garland, sang with a voice so full of earnest emotion, it bypassed Hannelore's defenses and struck a chord of pure, unadulterated longing. The world on the screen was a fantasy, a confection of impossible happiness. Hannelore knew it was propaganda. It had to be. It was designed to show the superiority of the American way of life, to make them feel the poverty of their own. But the craft of it was undeniable, and the audience around her was genuine. They laughed at the jokes. They sighed at the romantic moments. For them, this was not propaganda. It was just a movie, an escape, a normal part of a normal life. Hannelore thought of her own family in Hamburg. She tried to picture them sitting in a theater, laughing. The image was impossible. They were huddled in a bomb shelter or standing in a bread line, their faces gray with exhaustion and fear. The contrast was a physical pain, a tightening in her chest. The film on the screen depicted a world of warmth, safety, and abundance, a world where the biggest crisis was whether the family would have to move to New York. It was a world that, according to everything she had ever been taught, should not exist. It was a lie, a beautiful, powerful, seductive lie. The film reached its climax with the family gathered around a Christmas tree, singing, "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas." The scene was bathed in a warm, nostalgic glow. On the screen, Judy Garland's character comforts her little sister, promising a future where they will all be together, happy and safe. The pure, uncomplicated sentimentality of the moment was a weapon far more potent than a rifle. It chipped away at the armor of ideology Hannelore had spent years building.
The lights in the theater slowly came up. The spell was broken. People began to chatter, to stand up and stretch. But Hannelore Schmidt remained frozen in her seat, staring at the blank white screen. The film was over, but the images were now burned into her mind. The lie on the screen was so vivid, and the truth she had been told about her enemy felt so brittle, so gray, so utterly and completely wrong.
The ride back to Camp Mexia was conducted in absolute silence. The cheerful, blinking lights of the town receded, replaced by the dark, empty expanse of the Texas countryside. The only sounds were the whine of the truck's transmission and the whisper of the wind. The women sat on the hard benches, each locked in her own private world, processing the spectacle they had just witnessed. There were no defiant whispers, no shared glances of contempt for the enemy's crude propaganda. There was only a heavy, stunned quiet. They had been shown a vision not of American military might or industrial power, but of something far more subversive, American normalcy. A life of such profound peace and plenty that it made their own years of sacrifice and hardship seem not just tragic, but meaningless. As they disembarked inside the camp gates, the familiar sight of the barracks and the barbed wire seemed different. The camp had been their reality, a self-contained world with its own rules and certainties. Now it felt like a flimsy stage set. The real world was out there, in that town, in that movie theater, and it operated on principles they couldn't begin to comprehend. The women dispersed to their barracks without a word. Ilsa, the self-appointed camp leader, was waiting, her face a thunderous mask of fury. She had not been on the trip, and she immediately began her interrogation. "What did they show you?" she demanded. "What filth did they try to pour into your heads?" A few of the women tried to describe it. "A family. They were singing," one started, her voice trailing off. How could she explain it? How could she describe the vibrant colors, the easy laughter, the overwhelming sense of safety? Ilsa scoffed. "Decadent trash. Sentimental garbage designed to make you weak, to make you forget who you are. They show you their material wealth to make you ashamed of our German spirit." Her words were the familiar rhetoric, the ideological catechism they all knew by heart. But tonight, for the first time, they sounded hollow, brittle. They were just words, struggling to compete with the powerful images now imprinted on their minds. The memory of Judy Garland's smile was more real than Ilsa's anger. Hannelore lay on her cot, staring up at the wooden planks of the ceiling. The faint sounds of the camp, a cough from the next bunk, the distant footfalls of a guard, could not drown out the songs playing in her head. She tried to cling to her beliefs. It was a lie, a Hollywood fantasy. American life wasn't really like that. But the seed of doubt, once planted, was a voracious thing. Was it all a lie? The houses with the green lawns, the children on their bicycles, the casual way the American guards had sat in the back of the theater, watching the film along with them? They didn't act like masters of a collapsing regime. They acted like they had already won, and that the peace that followed was their natural state of being. She thought of her training in the Bund Deutsche Metall. They had been taught that they were part of a superior culture, a nation of destiny, fighting against a world of corrupt, inferior peoples. They had been shown films of their own, Leni Riefenstahl's epic portrayals of strength, unity, and will. Those images were powerful, mythic. But the images from the American film were powerful in a different way. They were intimate. They spoke not of national glory, but of personal happiness. It was a language she had forgotten existed. Gisela, on the cot across the narrow aisle, watched her. The older nurse had been quiet since their return, her face thoughtful. She had understood what the Americans had done. It was a masterstroke of psychological warfare, all the more effective for its apparent innocence. They hadn't needed interrogation rooms or propaganda lectures. They had used 2 hours of light entertainment to systematically dismantle a worldview. They had shown these women, raised on a diet of heroic sacrifice and glorious death, a world where the greatest virtue was simply to be happy. The war for Europe was over. The battles were done. But in the suffocating heat of a Texas night, inside a prisoner of war camp thousands of miles from the rebel of the Third Reich, a new war was just beginning. It was a quiet, internal struggle, fought in the minds of women like Hannelore Schmidt, a world they had been ordered to believe in, and the world they had just been shown. The barbed wire fence no longer seemed to be imprisoning their bodies. It was holding up a belief system that was crumbling from within, threatening to collapse into a void of doubt from which there might be no escape.